Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Doug Merritt, CEO of Aviatrix, the red-hot company redefining secure multi-cloud infrastructure. Before Aviatrix, Doug served as the transformative CEO of Splunk, where he scaled the company to over $2.5 billion in revenue and solidified himself as a defining force in enterprise software. Thank you, Doug, for joining us. Welcome.
You know what's so cool is I get to do a fair amount of these, and this is the first one that one of my best friends is on the other end.
But I think other people, we find it interesting because they always want to know, like, what's the genetic imprint or like the early experiences that forge, people into badass leaders. Like, it's not usually some straight path through Ivy League and yada, yada, yada. Like, we talked to Evan from Abnormal the other day. He was like, I was a total screw off when I was a kid. And here he is, this, badass CEO of one of the best security companies ever. And so
super cool company. I love that. We're a customer. Yeah, and I hate all the people and the media try and package stuff up. And it totally screws with people because it makes it non-approachable. There's very few people I've ever met that had a path at 10 years old and then followed every breadcrumb, and now they're this super successful person. And one of the commonalities you and I talk about a lot is life is about grittiness. It's about non-entitlement. It's about resilience and perseverance. And how you get that, you have a bunch of weird crap happen in your life that develops that over time. And I'm no exemption there. Like, I had a bunch of great parts of my life, but my early childhood, most of my childhood was super chaotic. I've got a beautiful mom who I love, and my dad has passed away, but he's a really, really loving, kind, gentle soul. But they got divorced when I was young. My mom is very flighty, very emotional. She gets attached to things and unattached really quickly. And we moved almost every year from the time that I was 5 years old until my freshman year in high school.
So you had to grow up really fast.
Yeah, when you're a new kid, at least once a year, sometimes twice a year, you get your ass kicked everywhere you go. That was, there's something in me that I'm a gentle person. I can see it with some of our kids. Some are a little bit more aggressive, but there's a gentleness there. And I don't like having to be hard on folks, but you develop a different way of being hard when you've got to find a way to prove yourself and deal with the bullies and all the other weird stuff that happens. And then my mom is she and my sister demand a lot of attention. And so that was also a huge empathy on how do I see through other people's eyes, but then a lot of callousness on I can spend hours listening to your problems and give you guys advice, but if you're not gonna do anything about it, then you're wasting my time. And it took me years to figure that out. But that wound up helping me, either hurting me or helping me in life. Like how emotionally attached am I gonna get to people? And that delicate balance of listening, but not having any expectations that anyone's gonna actually do anything.
When you think about that and you look at decades later, what do you draw upon on those early experiences to be like, all right, I got to get up every morning and, crack of dawn and go grind. And Splunk was a grind. Aviatrix has been a grind. The things you did in 2 startups earlier in your life. You grinded through larger companies, smaller companies, and you did all these triathlons, which is ultimately grind. Where does the grind factor come from for you, ultimately?
I've got a personal coach that I think and we spent a lot of time on, like, what is wrong with me? Why am I attracted to really, really hard things? Is there something deficient in me, or am I broken in some way? And I love his brew. So I think my entire life just set me up. My mom, again, she's an amazing person. I talked about some of the weird stuff, but she set really high expectations on me. And she is a hard worker, and she instilled a really hard work ethic early on. Like, if I brought home an A-, she would be insanely disappointed. And for me to survive where we moved, if I wasn't a star athlete somewhere, I wasn't going to survive. So lots of different things in my life. And we were poor for a while, and then we were fine for a while. And so all the usual, how do you realize that life is about the grind and that things aren't easy? But I love what my coach Phil says, which is the human dynamic is kind of framed at a high level between the desire for comfort that you had in the womb and the reality that life is about learning, experience, and growth. And we're constantly tempted to go back there, because all of my sessions with him is like, Jesus, like really, why am I back in the jaws of just pain? He's like, dude, that's what life is, but that's who you are. Like, just stop complaining about it and just accept it.
From our Phil, right?
Yeah, yeah.
This is the guy that kept Metallica together. Very special exec coaches. I don't have a lot of respect for a lot of coaches only because a lot of them just haven't done anything themselves to merit being coaches.
Agreed.
God love him.
He is fantastic.
Phil, what's his last name?
Phil Toll.
Phil Toll, yeah. That guy's, he's special. So you got this German company that we all know and respect called SAP. Comes into the United States. Gonna disrupt the Borg, right? So Oracle won the database world, as you know. Then they moved up stack, became an applications player, an ERP player. And you got SAP, and there's this decidedly, big time knife fight. And I remember meeting you in the parking lot of SAP, being like, this dude's a badass. I just kind of knew you were going to do big things. It was like you and I think it was Shy, like the key players that really got SAP rolling in the States. I know there were a lot of contributors to that success. I'm interested in ERP just as a starting point in your career, really hard. Would you highlight that, or would you highlight other things in your 20s that you were doing that were really particularly foundational at helping you drive your career?
So on the theme of jumping in a deep end and doing hard things, right? I went to Accenture first out of my career as a coder and realized I was a horrible coder, but had to learn, because I was not a computer science major. And so just kind of climbing that curve with a bunch of computer science majors next to me was a great learning experience. But then I did it again by going to Oracle and being a pre-sales SE and then a pre-sales sales rep. I didn't know anything about selling.
Which, by the way, legendary leaders in the industry were in your little pod, like the Caesar, these other guys were.
Vinny Smith, Mark Benioff was our boss for a while. Yeah, it was an incredible crew. But jumping in there, it's like, you got to sink or swim. Are you going to sell or not sell? If you didn't sell, you're going to be fired. So lots of those experiences just continued with the just jump in, figure it out, and develop grit. I think one of the more formative was at 30, I decided to start a company in a space I knew nothing about in the middle of the internet boom, the beginning of the internet boom. I saw the Netscape browser come out and the 3-tiered architecture is being evangelized back in 95, 96. And I had this view that talent is really underutilized in IP-driven industries like software. And now with the browser, you could land insight on the pipeline of talent, the current talent, their skills, what they're working on, how to give them better careers and better lives by delivering stuff directly to the line manager. And so we started this company called Icarian. We called it MRP for People, which was, for any of you out there that are saying manufacturing resource planning as an early ERP construct. Raised a bunch of money back then, $96 million, which was a lot back in the 95, 96 timeframe. Great investors. Ted Schlein from Kleiner Perkins was on our board. Apex Partners, so kind of marquee names. And we wound up not building a successful company. We got it to 12 million in revenue, had a beautiful vision, but I was more sales-driven than engineering-driven, and I kept changing the roadmap every time I talked to a customer. And I didn't understand the impacts of that at all.
They pulled 5,000 different directions, kiss to death.
Until 4 a.m. we were hosted, because we figured out that we couldn't bypass HR. They're going to be our customer. And there is no way they're going to get funding in going into Y2K for a system. So we had to host it for them. So we were SaaS way before SaaS was a thing. And the combination of those two got, by 4 years in, it's like, oh my God, this code base is a mess. And we have no maneuvering room. And then and then the crash happened, the internet.com bubble burst.
I don't think I remember any of those ASPs that were pre-cloud actually making it, because your COGS just to deliver this service was ridiculous. You couldn't amortize it over this gigantic infrastructure any of the public cloud players now.
It was impossible. We were fighting for Cisco routers and for Sun workstations. We had to host inside of Equinix and rent floor space and the economics. If I had been smarter and done all the work, it's I don't even care what the call to action was and how important the cause was. It would never have penciled out. But that was incredibly formative, and it led me to eventually SAP.
Before we go to the next one, here's a quick question for you, because a lot of founders will be watching this podcast. It's mostly for up and coming leaders, as you know, to learn from the scar tissue and try to avoid some of the pitfalls. How'd you feel about shutting down a company after raising $96 million? How do you look the investors in the eye? How do you look your employees in the eye? How did that burn into your soul face planning after that level of, scale and effort, and you had this whole team and their hopes and dreams were tied into your vision?
It was incredibly painful. At that point in time, we got to like 300 employees, and you recruit almost there's almost no interview cycle that as the founding CEO, you're not involved in. And it was more painful than just shutting it down. We went through 3 different rifts. I wound up replacing myself 6 months before we wound up selling it for $25 million after raising 96. So it wasn't a great outcome. But I watched, at first wasn't a big deal because the internet was still booming and with the first riff and people got jobs. But by the end, people were in hardship. Nobody was hiring. They had put their faith in us. We let a few customers down that really put the faith in us and well. And I watched one of the HR executives on an East Coast company lose their job. Again, really bad times, 2001, 2002. So it left a deep scar of this a huge responsibility. And to be an effective exec, you have to understand how different functions work at a much more granular level. And so instead of had done well enough, despite that outcome, there was a lot of companies that weren't doing well in 2001, 2002. And Kleiner and others were saying, hey, why don't you come in and take over this company for us as CEO, because we can see your skills. At the same time, PeopleSoft just gone through a transition. Craig Conway stepped in as president for Dave Duffield, and they were redoing their entire exec team. And for whatever crazy reason, they brought me in as the general manager of the HR products group, which was largely in managing engineers function.
People forget what a legendary company PeopleSoft was, the amount of talent there, and nobody ever done any HR tech well before that company. One last question before we jump to it, though, if it's okay. This is for kind of earlier stage companies. You look at these founders and they start these companies, and you can see it in most of their eyes. They don't believe there's any scenario under which they fail. They think that they're just keep raising money, keep doing this. They can thrash around and still find the goal line. Then when you look at the ones that are hitting the wall, a lot of them are kind of cavalier about it. We had this one company where the founder was like, yeah, we're shutting it down. $25 million investor, not 96, but just buy. And then they bought the company for scrap themselves. And I won't name the company here, but it was best brand name venture firm in the world. They were cavalier about it. It really bothered me. I was like, well, you just don't care about any of your employees or your investors. It's a grave responsibility.
It is. I agree. So my big lesson was great instincts on category. We sold a lot. We had close to 250 customers. So I had no problem with category design, no problem with sales and marketing, whiffed engineering because I didn't understand the true end-to-end process flows and how engineers think and how to guide them effectively, not disrupt them. And the people, the over-under on me staying at PeopleSoft was 90% you're going to last less than a year because I was a startup guy and I like to be very fluid. And at that point, it's $1.8 billion, I think. It was a big company in Silicon Valley at that point in time. And I was managing engineers, right? 80% of my team, I had product marketing, engineering, and support. That's the way they did their general managership. And the reason I took that is if you want to learn engineering, if that's where I really screwed up, then I better go manage these guys and really understand how does engineering work so I don't screw that up again. And it was an insane lesson because Craig had the internet, the HTML browser, and internet-based apps were all the rage. I went there in 2001, if I remember, and he had pushed because they were getting their butt kicked by not being browser-based and internet-oriented. And he had pushed to get all the products, including HR, out on a less than 1 year release cycle, redeveloped with an HTML front end. And they didn't even have time to run a single test.
This is before web apps, JavaScript, and all this other crap was just readily available.
Yeah, there was a huge debate internally. They had 3 competing groups with different initiatives. 1, rewrite everything in object-oriented database. 2, do everything with JavaScript. And 3, HTML. And he went with HTML, which may or may not have been the best idea, but he made a decision. But I got there, it's I haven't run development before. It's no, it's all about vision. It's perfect. You go to market, category, is shrinking at that point in time. We need to reinvigorate HR, you'll be fine. And the first week I'm there, my head of support says, have you seen this chart? And it's what chart? It was the rate of incoming bugs versus the rate of resolution, and it's inverted. Well, explain that to me a little bit more. So it could have been a better lesson in engineering and engineering development philosophy and effective controls and comprehensive approach. And Learned a lot, had a great time. It went into play with Oracle, and Shai started calling me because she was poaching all of my top engineering leaders to come to SAP because of the disruption of the Oracle acquisition. And you finally called and said, hey, I'm hiring all your best guys, and they all love working for you. Like, will you come and work over here? Hey, the last thing I want to do is go work for a German company. And I hit no, thanks. He goes, let's have lunch with me. And I had lunch with Shai, and one of the most charismatic, intelligent, dynamic, interesting human beings. And after the lunch, he's like, yeah, I'd love to go to work with you. But that was a continuation of, like, I'm going to keep doing engineering for a while. Like, I really want to get this right. Before I go found another company, I'd better truly understand how this works. But he gave me a really interesting charter, which was, in his view, ERP was going to begin to slow down, which saturated the market with finance and manufacturing apps. And he needed an exploit. And he said, you're kind of an entrepreneur inside of a big company. Go figure out what we can do.
Manufacturing in the US, you really didn't need a lot of manufacturing modules yet. Nobody else came on scene because guess what? We were sending factories to China left and right during that time. So you're like, if we don't replace this manufacturing revenue and build new modules, we're going to get smacked.
Again, how do you throw yourself in the deep end and survive? The SAP culture is very distinct. Everything's run out of Germany, which has always been one of their challenges. The docs used to be all in German. All the code comments were in German while they were trying to go international. And so I got an apartment in Waldorf and flew over, spent 2 summers of 4 months in Germany just to get to know the folks, would fly over every other week. I think I'm over 2 million miles on United now, and a chunk of that was flying to Germany all the time. But had to figure out, all right, what can I do where I'm not going to get eaten by the rest of the company, and defined a 2x2 matrix for the division, which was what is ERP good at? What are the constructs that really drive an ERP system? And the vertical axis was the amount of collaboration. Most ERP systems are very low people collaboration. You're inputting something into a system, payroll, general ledger, et cetera. So low collaboration to high collaboration, and then process fluidity. Most ERP systems are highly process repetitive. Again, payroll, you can study the legislation, code everything you need into payroll, and it might change a couple percent per year. And so in the lower quadrant was low collaboration, low process change rate. Way out on the right was the Microsoft and Google suite. Word, PowerPoint, Excel, lots, no consistent process, huge collaboration. I tried to find the middle area, which became all these operational applications, where 50% of the schema would be consistent for any company or industry. But the UI would have to morph, the schema would have to morph, you'd have to have a really fluid workflow engine. And that actually is what led to me being aware of Splunk. Because for years, we were bound by the SAP relational database. And I kept going back to a relational database does not solve this. And our data warehouse didn't solve it either. It was a super rigid data warehouse, the proprietary one that we had. We eventually bought Business Objects, a few other companies that helped with the BI piece.
But it was still a heavy lift. That stuff was all such a heavy lift.
It was really heavy.
Real time wasn't even a concept at that time.
But we invented a bunch of stuff. I gathered a bunch of teams from different parts of SAP, and we grew idea when I got there in 2005 to close to $1 billion in licensed revenue by the time I left in 2011. Leveraging the SAP install base, there were benefits that we'd had, but it was brand new offerings, starting with the governance, risk, and compliance suite, which kind of fit that middle area. There was some degree of repetitiveness, but there's so much fluidity and segregation of controls and overall role reassignments and interrogation of transaction logs. And
but you guys really successfully penetrated that space and moved alongside Oracle. And it was always this kind of parallel battle. Anything you can look back on where you're like, hey, any young founder, let's just say our CEO, is always going to have a handful of customers and one burly one that they just can't stand. How did you guys think about Oracle and outmaneuvering them? And it was you had a ferocious founder there in Larry. You had just a lot of talent. And some of the talent that, as you know, you came from there. So much talent, so much momentum. They owned the database. Our databases were phenomenal. How'd you guys think about the knife fight with a player like that?
One of my views is it is extraordinarily difficult to commandeer more than one layer in the tech stack, in the old OSI 7-layer model. And one of the big mistakes that companies make what I've seen is if you are not number one or maybe number two in a category, it's really painful. The economics never work in your favor. You have no pricing power. The margins never really work. And we can see that with the Sybases of the world that just they were number two to Oracle, or number three, and they eventually just had to be sold because
It's old Talladega Nights. If you're not first, you're last.
you're last.
You're last.
And if you monopolize something, so Oracle obviously monopolized the relational database world, and SAP had monopolized finance and manufacturing apps, then you can actually be sloppy and get away with it. But my view is you actually would have had a very different, bigger, more exciting company if you just actually stayed in your swim lane. And so I look at all of Oracle's forays into apps. I still don't view it as successful at all. Like, they're very mediocre apps.
I don't see them leading in any category.
No, other than database. Database is still really strong. And they've been pretty good, but they had so much distraction to take them off the database wave that things like Snowflake and things like Splunk and are emerging that they should have been on top of it. They've stayed close to their knitting. And SAP had the inverted approach, which is we hate paying these guys database fees. We're going to build our own database. And that also was a joke. I know all the SAP guys will take offense to this, but our relational database was very mediocre. We had our in-memory database that Vishal Sikka, who's a genius, helped craft, but it never, while they worked, they didn't become number one.
You just fought a different battle. You just went up the stack and you just said, we're not going to deliver value on databases. We've already lost that war. Let's move.
That was my focus. My focus for Shai was ignore that stuff. Let's keep inventing on the apps area. There's all these different modalities of app interaction that we have not mastered at all. If you just look at this 2x2, let's keep filling, let's get better and better at the stuff that we're actually, that ECC and ABAP was built for. We were not good in HR. We were not good in CRM. There's a bunch of areas that we need to improve. And then let's fund these brand new areas that evangelize a different development and architectural paradigm. And the more you got distracted in different areas of the stack, they also want to compete with Microsoft on the UI. There's all this weird stuff going on. It's just stay closer to knitting, stay closer to knitting. And yeah, these are really successful companies, but I just think they could be more. They look at finally Oracle now is in a resurgence, but their market cap languished for 15 years while Google emerged and Amazon emerged. And
yeah, I mean, they've stayed relevant. What are they worth? $300 billion? It's hard to argue with that. I built a $300 billion company. Okay, so let's fast forward to the first call you got from Godfrey. I mean, I did a thing with him. I can't remember if it was a podcast or just an interview about how he selected you. Remember I threw out a blog there.
I remember that.
But let's talk about that. So you're at Cisco, he calls you. Tell us about that courtship.
So when I was at SAP with the division that we were talking about, I wound up interacting with the BI vendors a lot because we were trying to figure out how much could we borrow given the challenges with the BI stack and data warehouse and stack that SAP
You
had.
needed to partner with better data platforms because you weren't going to win that battle.
Right. And Godfrey was the CEO of Hyperion before they were sold to Oracle, right? Oracle bought them. And so we spent a lot of time with them on, given our initial focus on governance, risk, and compliance in the office of the CFO, how could we partner with Hyperion rather than collide with them consistently? And so we got to know each other pretty well during that time. When I left SAP with all the chaos of transitioning CEOs and other things, I took a weird detour to Cisco for 18 months that I still don't really understand other than it's helping me at Aviatrix. And realized after 9 months of being there, this was not.
I'll be honest, when you did that, I was like, Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, Doug. I didn't say anything, but I was like, what are you doing over there? Come on.
It made sense because I stepped out to do a startup that wound up not working. I inherited a startup that had a ton of code problems. And I didn't want to take another risk with a small company. And we were also, from my division, interacting with Cisco a ton. And so I got to know Padma and Pankaj and Rob, all the core leaders that were over at the time. And they were drawing me over. It's like, hey, cool job for you. You can help evangelize, move us to software, move us to SaaS, kind of do what you did for SAP, but do it here. We'll pay you a ton of money. Safe job. It's like, okay, I'll take that.
A lot of people forget there's some legendary people that came out of Cisco. You've got Jay Shri at Arista, you got Volpe, you got some seriously big brain power that was there foundationally. Mortgage is really special. I mean,
highest value company in the world for a while. So I went over there for this odd diversion. 9 months in, I realized the networking world is so different than the rest of the world, and I'm the odd man out. So I was already beginning to talked to Pankaj, who I report into as the president of all engineering and products, about whether this was the right move for me or not. And Godfrey called and said, "Hey, weird question for you. I know it's been a while since you've done sales roles because you went over to the product side, but I hear you're actually a pretty good go-to-market guy. And I'm really trying to find somebody at Splunk that can help me with go-to-market, but ultimately can be a successor. Would you be interested in talking to me?" And with all my time with Godfrey, who you work for is really important. And I really loved who he was. And it's like, Godfrey, it doesn't even matter what company you are with, like I would come work for you for sure.
That was probably a no-brainer call to take.
It was a no-brainer call to take. But I did tell him, I have learned, because I went to Cisco in this super weird product marketing, product management role, in order to see if we could get to a independent software and SaaS thing. I'd just come out of that. It's like, I'm never doing that again. Like, take the job in front of you because you want the job in front of you, not to get in and then hope to get a different job. And so my immediate feedback was, I don't need a succession plan. Like, I am no longer intent on being CEO. I just want to work for great companies, be able to contribute, work with great teams, and make a ton of money. And he was like, no, I'm really going to retire. It's like, Godfrey, I swear, it doesn't matter. Oh, you'll be bored if you just do sales. Like, no, I promise you I will not. Like, just hire me for the sales role.
You hadn't done sales in a long time. And now Splunk was what, a few $100 million? And they had some pretty good sales guys before that. How'd you approach it?
While I had not been a CRO in a long time, I had responsibility for sales. And I grew up, like when I went to Oracle, the next 10 years of my life was in sales. But I went, tagged a bunch of CROs I knew. It's like, he helped me prep for this interview. And I had 4 different meetings with Godfrey. The last one was over 4 hours down in the satellite office in Cupertino, which was a tiny office back then. It wasn't Santana Row, with his feet up on a desk in classic Godfrey style, just literally throwing barb after barb. Okay, we're going to organize by industry. How would you do that across the entire go-to-market? Okay, tell me, what does a BDR team do and how would you structure it? We're going to restrike territories. Walk me, how do you make channel work? And I'd be at the whiteboard writing furiously and trying to prove.
Let's drill into that for 1 second. I mean, I tell everybody who will listen, do not fuck around with 30-minute flybys or first meeting or 1 hour. Don't do like 2 meetings and then hire somebody. I think the way he handled that was perfect. When we look at really successful long-term hires, usually it involved a lot of soaking time between the CEO or founder / both and the key person they were trying to hire, where you're really workshopping the work. You're almost like in the work, whiteboarding and visualizing yourself in the job, including a sober view of all the shit you're gonna have to crawl through. No like overly hyping it. I mean, the people that overhype each other end up breaking up. I respect that approach that he took, where he just hammered you. I just can't tell you how many CEOs just sit there and sell. You. Like, you're going to buy at some point.
It was awesome.
As a candidate, you wanted to be drilled, so you knew that your new boss was going to have the conviction once you were there.
And we're going to be able to work well together. Like, how did he respond to my responses? How do we debate in that piece? Because he didn't always agree with my answers. I was trying to justify my answers, and I agree. I mean, you are an icon in many areas, and recruiting is one of those. We do it all wrong. When I go back to my mistaken hires, I didn't take the time that Godfrey did with me. And the good hires, it's a relationship, like it's a courtship, and you take time with it. You test, and you get to really know each other. And I agree, like, you never want to oversell. I literally try and strip line every candidate and tell them how completely broken and screwed up the environment is, and try and unsell them from coming in at this point. Because
just suit. You want about swimming?
Yeah. But he did a great job, and it was. Splunk was a truly magical 8 years for me, up until maybe the last 48 hours. But up until very end, it was incredible.
So like when you joined, you got sales, and you've got a bunch of emerging players. Like Sumo was pretty hot, had A++ investors. It was a cool software only thing. You didn't have systems, you didn't have storage. You had a pretty streamlined, almost like a search engine style company. You had Elastic coming up with the open source support. You had a lot of big players. You've got IBM and different ways to think about real-time data processing, and Watson. You had all kinds of peripheral use thieves, let's call them, competitors. And what did you guys do when you stepped into the company? What were the major decisions that were made that broke Splunk out in the real-time data world And then let's talk about how the security business came out of nowhere and became the dominant SIM in the world and like the industry standard. That's super fascinating to go from one trick pony to two trick and win in both spaces.
So one, most humans are not great at foundational interrogation and first principles. And what I felt the world missed about Splunk, how I got to know them at first was from SAP on we need a data structure that isn't hardened and deeply schematized to make this division that we're trying to create work. Like what is out there? And that is very contrarian to the way that data structures work. There has to be some degree of structure. And where I think most of the players, Sumo Elastic, and it as a good example, missed it, is they forced a degree of structure, JSON format or other format, to the data before it went into the index. And the beauty of Splunk was no structure needed at all. You put our forwarder next to whatever thing you want to collect, and it sprays completely unvarnished data into the index. There is no enrichment. There is no transformation for the core data.
It's up to the customer to interpret.
And why do you do that? Because everyone said, no, you just got to get some degree of structure to your logs. Like that is a silly question. Like what are logs for? Logs are personal device vehicles for developers based on whatever the hell they're working on to get feedback on is the thing they're doing right or wrong. How do you structure, like you can create structure around some logs for things that are repetitive, but a bunch of stuff your developers are working on has not been developed ever before. And like, how are you going to structure that stuff? Like you've got to take, it's got to be a garbage lake. It's got to be willing to take anything, but then make sense out of it. So I think everyone kind of missed that as the core of Splunk. It made it worse because what Godfrey started, and then we accelerated through the years, was now you got this big, unmanageable data store. How do you put lenses on it for things that are more repetitive? And we started with IT ops. If British Airways has got a down reservation system, of course, they didn't know why. They've got monitors and all kinds of systems to try and stop a down situation. So it's an unknown unknown. Well, what do? You use Splunk for that because we'll find the needle in the haystack because we're a garbage lake. But as we got in there, it's like, all right, how do you, for the repetitive things, like if you've got the source of truth and you're dealing with IT, why don't you start to take over a lot of the monitoring and app investigation and instrumentation stuff because you can get it from your garbage lake so that you can do both the repetitive things and the non-repetitive things.
Yeah, now did you guys, I remember you guys kept releasing apps all the time. How does a customer do a dumpster dive and come up with something interesting really fast? And I'm curious, like when you guys moved into the application layer, that was kind of a tough thing for a core data platform kind of company to go do. How'd you focus on it? Because you had 50 million use cases. You had like jet fighters using this thing, everybody. So like back to your earlier Icarian, faceplant that you've described, getting pulled into millions of directions by different customers. How do you know where to focus your engineering dollars into high value use cases that are repeatable?
We tried lots of things, so a lot of experimentation. And by the time I got there, the thing that was starting to come back that I saw as the CRO, we call it the SVP of Field Operations, but it was marketing, support, and all sales stuff, was if the use case was too narrow, because we had an app for VMware users. How do you get insight and interrogate ESXi? We had an app for Microsoft Outlook users. It's like, no. Those monitors can be done really well by the vendor themselves.
Right.
Where we shine is when there's confusion and complexity. Like what is the problem between a database, Outlook, an SAP app, and your VMware virtualization layer?
How do you coach all these different disparate, like you said, 50 million different customer buyer personas? And so you have to, how does a player like Splunk get the end user to actually build that app for themselves? I mean, that's total, talk about chaos. It sounds really chaotic.
So for where we gravitated to with those lessons is who are the people that had roles that have to manage a hyper heterogeneous landscape. We can't go talk to the owner of the one thing. We've got to go to the who has the visibility and accountability for the many things. And that started with IT ops, like we were the IT ops system. And we created this thing called ITSI, which was supposed to be a SIM-like thing, but for the DevOps, IT ops guys that were trying to keep the systems up and running and correct them when they're broken. And we got into, so I had to keep constraining the company on, here is the buyer, and don't wander. I know we can go
By the way,
help.
would have been really unpopular. Like
It was super unpopular.
People being like, F you, I'm going to go build an app for this. I can get 10 million out of this customer. You had to like probably quell an uprising to get everybody to completely focus on this buyer persona.
Constantly. And it goes back to, if you're not number one, if you're not the winner, leave, go home. And so we could work with BMW to help them instrument the manufacturing floor, or Audi to help them with their new electric car, or the F-16 to help them instrument that plane. But there's no way we're going to have the dominant application for all of automotive manufacturing. Like, that is not who we were. We understood IT ops. We got dragged into SecOps. When I got there, Godfrey wouldn't allow us to talk about security for good reasons. The business model, as everyone knows that looks at Splunk, was based on data volume. And to get data volume, you want as many people coming to the data and then adding their own data so you could get this beautiful cohort that went up into the right.
You look at consumption pricing, everyone's like, consumption pricing. Everyone's obsessed with switching there, as you know. It's hard. It's been hard. It's been a wrenching transition. It's 4 or 5 years in now. You guys might have been the first massive at-scale consumption style player.
We were, and I am totally anti-consumption. And any of you out there that are trying to switch to consumption, I would beg you not to do it. Because it works until it doesn't. And when it doesn't work, it's really, really, really painful.
Well, I remember your customers would be like, wait, where the F did I get this $10 million bill? Fuck you, I'm not paying this. And that's the thing, is they got hooked on the heroin of what you did because you were the only player that did it right. So they had no alternative, but then they get pissed off. I remember you get all these customer calls from customers. The IT guy loved you. The finance guy hated you.
And even the IT guy hated us, ultimately, because no leader has got a variable budget. I learned that by studying I2 back in 99, 2000, where you had we'll get a percentage of money saved. That fell totally on its face, and they had to switch models, because if I'm the head of manufacturing and supply chain and I saved $100 million, that doesn't mean my budget goes up by $10 million. I just get a pat on the back from the CEO. So if you've got a variable cost structure and I've got a fixed payment structure, you're going to screw me over and over. And that's all I saw with Splunk, is data volume was great up until like half a terabyte. And then it was horrible. And the value of Splunk was the more and more data that you got, the more insight you got. So our pricing model was literally in the way of the value that the product had and the customers wanted. And so it was a constant love-hate relationship.
But you would have been slammed on storage costs if you couldn't pass those through to the customer. So you had no choice.
Actually, storage is not that expensive.
Interesting. I thought it was pretty expensive early on, no?
Compute is really expensive. So that's why we went to the cloud. There are many, many reasons we went to the cloud. But one was, if you're just taking all this data and passing it through our index into a storage vehicle and leaving it there, there's some cost, but that's not extraordinary. When you run an invasive query, which is where the value is, now we can charge for that. So we came up with a synthetic charge mechanism in the cloud that was a combination of storage and network costs and compute utilization, but it was there to try and equate to the value, which is store petabytes, store exabytes. I don't give a crap. We're only going to charge you when you access that stuff, which is all they're asking for all along, is align with my value.
So, yes, this is interesting. This is where your product background probably helped you a lot as a go-to-market guy, because you just had to completely lock into use case, pattern recognition, where's repeatability, and know what the customer pain is going to be. Tell us about that security move, where it's like, okay, we're a one-trick pony. We figured out the use case. Now we're at scale. We're continuing our growth trajectory. Godfrey's like, I want to do security. You're saying, I want to do security. Security is a big market. It's a pain in the ass. There's 50 million customers. There's whack-a-mole of the industry. I love it, but it's whack-a-mole. It's a ballsy move for a public company to be like, all right, we're going to go do something adjacent here. Of course, same core platform, but completely different go-to-marketing users. We have to go evangelize a new product to a completely new buyer persona.
Right, which is super hard. That was like 10% of the difficulty of changing the business model. but it's, in most companies, that'd be the hardest thing to do. But it was an easy decision because our customers pulled us. Like Godfrey, when I first got there, literally wouldn't let us talk about security, because security were Splunk huggers. They didn't want to share the data. And without sharing the data, you didn't get the data volume lift. So it's like, no way, don't let security get involved. But security kept coming to the table. And the more that we talked to them and looked at them, IT had urgency when the shit really hit the fan. Like the reservation system is down, but their usage on a daily basis wasn't that high. The value wasn't that high. Security had daily, hourly crises. Their usage was really high, and they kept grabbing more and more data ultimately because it's so consequential whether you can see and interrogate and resolve a potential breach or not. So a whole different, they were much more powerful than IT ops. They had more budget, they had board access, but the need that we filled was so important. And we started down that journey of like, let's accumulate a bunch of security assets, starting with the SIEM. Godfrey bought this tiny little company of free ex-Splunkers that was the genesis of our SIEM. Then we started buying a bunch of other companies to fill out the day in the life of a SOC analyst.
Must be getting a kick out of the fact that we're both, not trivial investors in Sierra, which is like really tackling this problem from a new angle and just exploding, because like almost like you guys started this sort of data security explosion where you're like, data is the core of the problem. And now players like that are like, yeah, we're going to take it to a completely different level and classify data in real time. When you got tapped to be CEO, what was going on with Splunk in that moment? So Godfrey decides to retire. He's like, all right, Doug, it's your time. What was going on there? And tell us about that transition.
So we had just finished a $450 million year. Our year started February 1. I interviewed in summer. So I got told I had the job on September 11th of 2015, which I'll always remember because our flight, I was trying to get back from a QVR in Europe on a United flight, and someone called in a bomb threat, and the flight had to be diverted. And I was trying to get back to me with Godfrey to be told whether I had the job or not, and I had to do it over the phone because I got grounded in Germany for 2 days. But I started the interview cycle in August, and I had no idea. I was a year and a quarter in at that point in time. Loving my CRO job, loving working for Godfrey, great product. Company was doing well, and he comes during one of our one-on-ones. He said, "Hey, I was serious. I've got 2 external candidates. You're my internal candidate. Do you want to interview or not?" And I said the same thing, but said at the beginning, it's like, I'd be honored to interview, but if I don't get the job, don't assume that I don't want my current job. I'm not the jilted lover that you got to fire. Like, I love my job and I love this company, but I had insider knowledge, and we had just begun to try and start a cloud. We took on-prem Splunk and threw it in a hosted version in AWS and began to offer it to people. We had a GM that wasn't doing a very effective job. It wasn't very constrained on what we're offering, and that thing was super problematic. And probably 5 million of our 450 million of revenue. But it was really clear that we had to get to cloud. We had to change the business model as you went to cloud to much more of a SaaS-oriented structure. And we had to get past this data volume
You
cliff.
knew that in doing so, you might kill the company. I mean, it was perilous. Like all of a sudden, you can't charge for storage. You can't charge for a lot of things because customers could amortize those costs over the public cloud, compute and storage, as you know. And so now you've got to do a lot more value selling, right? And that's a tough one to go and tell the public markets, like, hey, we're transitioning our business. It's going to be rough. Tell us about that.
Up until Aviatrix is the hardest thing I've ever done. And it really was because of the public markets. We were 90+% margin business. We were software only. Everything was perpetual license. It was all on-prem. We didn't have any accountability for the software. Like, we had to remake the business from the ground up. Like, literally from the business process flows and the IT systems all the way to our pricing model, to our go-to-market models, but it takes years to do that. And what didn't matter until we restructured the Splunk offering so it actually would work in the cloud, not just be a hosted.
So many times the CEO is just kicking ass. We're like, look, 90%, we're rocking and rolling. We're like, what's wrong? Life's good. And forget whether or not cloud was an obvious thing that the entire world needed to do, even though I think it's only, 12% penetrated now. It's like 15 maybe, something like maybe 20. It's still incredible. But the decision to go from like something that's awesome to putting your badge on the line and some other things that we shouldn't talk about because there's probably a mixed, audience here. Like, that's a quote unquote gutsy move that might have been a suicide mission. Like, what did you feel was pulling you in that direction? Besides the thing that we know now is obvious. This is 7-8 years ago. Wasn't that obvious to go from like this ridiculous money printing racket to moving this ship into a completely different environment?
Yeah, it's actually 10 years ago. We started in 2015. And it was my guiding post was the customer base that we could see. We got Apple to over a terabyte. We were getting JPMC to close to a terabyte. There are a handful of companies that were big customers that could handle the complexity of a sprawling Splunk environment. But our mission was to bring machine data to everyone across the planet, make it usable and useful. And we couldn't fulfill that mission unless we managed the complexity for our customers. And I had to change the pricing structure. It couldn't be data volume based because we would not be able to address the market either. And cloud, for me, we had probably 4,000 or 5,000 customers when we started that transition. So we had 4,000 contracts that were locked into this as their pricing model. It's like, well, if I offer something brand new, we actually fulfill the mission and I can price it in a way that makes sense where we align value with what the customers are going to get. It's good. And that was my pitch to the board is like, this could totally blow up. Like I guarantee you could put a monkey in this chair and we'll get to $1 billion. My belief is if we do not bite the bullet and do this, you're not going to get to 2 or 3 billion. You won't build an iconic company. It will be sold. Like, it's company's going to be fine. If someone's going to buy it, it's a great asset. But if you want the chance to build a 10, 20, 30 billion in revenue company and dominate a category, you have to do this.
I remember when we were talking with you about how do we become $100 billion. It was $100 billion TAM. We knew that. This is many, many, many years ago when you and I started working together pretty more intimately to try to figure out Splunk and its cloud transition. And that was an interesting time. A lot of really tough decisions I watched you make. And then you had some background. So let's talk about some of the shit you were dealing with, okay? We're going to kind of go there a little bit. I always felt like you had a lot of talented people. You know, you had Conti, you had Susan, you had a bunch of interesting people, Tim. But it's like there was this wrenching dynamic among some of the leadership and then underneath in the culture where the company's going through change. You guys have gone through multiple changes and it wasn't for everybody. There was always some faction, you know, not buying into the vision, not buying into that. How'd you keep your fingers on that and not like literally go home and light yourself on fire every day? I mean, that was must have been really frustrating.
It probably goes all the way back to the beginning of the conversation. Like what motivates me and how am I built? And because there were many, at least one day a week, I want to go and light myself on fire at home. People change management is the hardest thing in the world.
Like sales didn't want to give me data to finance, and finance is like, how do I forecast the street? We want to get it 10 to 15x multiple, but we can't tell the street what we're going to do next quarter. We're going to beat and raise. And you had consumption and I was getting in the way. And so that was an interesting, like, constant battle. And then the technical people that wanted to support the on-prem business and the technical people that wanted to move to cloud, battles. And then this long entrenched culture of like the day-to-day engineer being a little on the prima donna-ish side, to put it mildly. I don't want you to throw anybody under the bus. There's some great engineers that came out of there, world-class, but also like kind of an attitude too. So how did you stay the course as a leader through all this chaos underneath you before we start talking about the board?
To get the job, I had to create a 15-page PowerPoint that went through why we were going to go through this transition and why it was so important. It had a whole host of metrics on what we were expecting as far as revenue growth, when did we think the transition was going to actually happen, what would we have to shift within the business. And for me, I just kept focused on the long-term goal of what are we trying to build, and the noise was super distracting most days, but just kept reiterating over and over, like, with this, what we're playing for. There's, I forget, I think it was like 70 billion, but there's this massive TAM. We're the leader. These are all the different elements that we have to do internally as a company to get there, and kept swapping out people and swapping out tactics and swapping out approaches and try and keep momentum on the goal. When things got too lethargic and too much inertia, that's when you had to bite the bullet. It's like, so painful, but I'm going to have to swap out this leader. I'm going to have to swap out this team. I'm going to have to...
There was a wholesale house cleaning, and I respected that. Thank God I'm not a CEO of anything, because if I was, I would have been like, you're all fired. I'm just going to promote all your lieutenants, and they're going to be on this page or leave. And a lot of CEOs and founders do that. They're like, you know what? You guys get on board. There is no dissent. We're going this way. And if you don't like it, leave. And you didn't really do that. You kind of surgically cut out people and then surgically upgraded people. But like, how did you deal with the board through all this crazy stuff? You had this collection of people that really didn't know your business or what you did. I mean, Godfrey knew, but the rest of the group, there were a few that seemed really, really sharp and on it. And, they seemed like they were valuable and they understood Splunk and where you were going with it. Now the company's $3 billion, but you had some board dysfunction. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, Godfrey knew, but he eventually stepped off the board. It's really hard to have the ex-CEO be chairman of the company. As anyone that's ever done that knows.
But it does help that the guy actually knows what the company does.
Yeah, and he knew, and that helped. John Connor's brilliant, like one of the best board members in the planet. He couldn't add more value.
He's a loss to the VC industry. I mean, didn't he retire? I think he retired.
I think he's been trying to retire forever. I think he's still on a few boards, but I made the mistake of letting the board get too big, not rotating as many people as I probably should have. Godfrey had built, because there's Godfrey's board, and the company was wildly different than it was under Godfrey because of all the changes that we're making. And we trying to really understand a business just takes so much attention and patience, given all those transformations.
Constantly educating your board, and in educating them, you have to tell them, hey, I'm doing this for this. Well, what about that? What about that? And they're like, that you're trying to not tell them that's an idiotic question. Please move to the next question before I light myself on fire right in front of you. I'm not going to wait till you get home, light myself on fire in front of you if you ask me another stupid question. And that was your daily routine with several of your board members.
We were trying. We'd have product education sessions for the board, do strategic offsites, do financial education sessions. Even people that were super financially educated on the board, it's so confusing when you're going through a transformation to really understand the metrics and what drives the metrics, which for both Conti and Jason Child, who replaced Conti, and Ken Tinsley, who was our head of IR,
That's a talented group too.
Absolute genius, yeah. But the amount of time that we had to spend, we had 48 sell-side analysts that covered us, trying to help them build their models and trying to help them understand all the puts and takes when you're going through that many transitions. And the board, I don't think ever really understood what Splunk did. Like going back to that index piece, didn't really understand the transition, certainly didn't understand that it was a religious movement and we were halfway across the desert. And for better or worse, I was a religious leader. I'd become the new founder with everything we're doing. And taking out that religious leader in the middle of the desert journey is probably not a great idea, no matter how much you understand or don't understand it. So it's just huge lessons for me it was the middle of COVID. No one was getting together face to face. We weren't even allowed to back in Santa Clara. You had to get a pardon from the governor to get people together. It was ridiculous. Of just not dragging my board, not probably curating the board as much as I should have. Smaller boards are better, less people is better, and not dragging along as much as I need to for them to really, really understand the puts and takes of what we're doing.
I mean, in fairness to them, it's not like when you're a public company, the A crowd wants to hang out on your board. If you look at like Slootman, for example, one of the great operators of all time, what's he doing? He's not hanging out on a lot of public boards. He's hanging out at Solera. I think the A crowd wants to do private, the excitement, then move to IPO, and then everyone, once it's public, you feel like it's another job. Is it harder to manage a public company board than a public company leadership team?
Way harder.
Interesting.
And way harder than a private company board. We're Aviatrix. One of my selection criteria, I knew 3 of the board members super well. 2 were early investors in Splunk, and there's only 5 of them.
But you guys separated chairman from CEO. Was that a real mistake for the board to make, where you just didn't have just one person?
Huge mistake, and I'd never do it again. Never, ever again.
Well, did you abdicate the chairmanship?
I didn't. That was Godfrey said, nope, we got to do the right governance thing. So you're going to be CEO. And John Connors was our lead independent because Godfrey was chairman. So it was good for him. Obviously, it wasn't good for me. And he also engineered, he was chairman for a while. And when we got to the point where it's like, Godfrey, this isn't working. Like your ex-CEO as chairman doesn't work. He replaced himself with Graham Graham Smith, who's a great finance guy, but John knew the business inside and out and was incredibly strategic in his thinking. And losing John as the chairman was the wrong thing.
Let's go to the worst part of this conversation. I think you called me on a Friday night at like 9:00 and said, I just got fired. And I was like, what the fuck?
That was your exact reaction, yeah.
I was like, what? Why? What happened? You guys are on fire. You're like, yeah, it's some lumps. It's tough market. COVID's tough. COVID fucked everything up. And then all of a sudden it became awesome for cloud companies, but you weren't quite there. You were still in the middle of the desert. And so, they didn't give you the time, but the way they handled it just out of nowhere with a phone call on a Friday night, what the actual fuck? Who does that? So I'm curious how you felt when you got that call to knife you in the back and be like, yeah, you're out and I'm in. I'm the guy. Not to throw anybody under the bus, but I think that was one of the most poorly handled transitions I have ever seen in 32 years of recruiting.
I have to admit, I was in total shock. It probably took me a year or 2 years to actually get over everything that happened. And the conversation started as flew in late Thursday night because we had a board meeting the next week, and we had some internal meeting with the board, and there was a prep meeting with Graham and Silver Lake guy that was on the board on Friday. And I was driving to the hotel at 11 o'clock at night, and Graham said, "Are you driving?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "You should probably pull over." He goes, "Yeah, I know this is going to be surprising to you." And as soon as what I thought he was going to say is, but I decided I want to resign as the chairman. But as soon as someone starts with, "I know that you're not going to expect this," that tells you that you fucked something up pretty badly, because you should never surprise people with news like that. And it was a total surprise. Like, it couldn't have been more from left field. The company market cap was $36 billion. At that point in time, we had a miss in Q3 of COVID, where we only grew 44% on ARR versus the 46 that we had projected. And we were elaborate with the street on why that happened. But since then, we had crushed every single quarter. We'd grown revenue, ARR, close to another $750 million. The stock had taken a dip when we missed, and now is at an all-time high. It's like I'm super confused. Like, my first question was, did my assistant screw up an expense report? Like, is there something? Am I being fired for cause? He goes, no, you're not being fired for cause. And I spent 2 days just begging them to take a different approach. It's like, I'll leave. Like, the only job the board has is hire and fire the CEO. So I respect that.
And you can't fire one without a succession plan. They had no plan.
Don't do it this way. I will pretend like this has ever happened. I'll help you search. I'll do whatever you want. This is going to be bad for the company. And for whatever reason, they're convinced. It's like, no, this will be no problem. It's like a 2 to 3% down situation. It's like, that is not going to happen.
Sorry, I think the stock got hammered by $25 billion in market value lost.
It was insane. And it never recovered. Like, they sold it successfully to Cisco for $28 billion, which is close to $10 billion below the high when they let me go.
This rough CEO transition with no plan. Look, I love Gary. Gary Steele's
he's a great guy. I love Gary too.
His biggest job was half the revenue of Splunk, or 1/3. It didn't make any sense. And the search took forever. And so but you had, a finance guy running a technical company. You had people leaving every single day. I had billions of Splunkers calling me and my search firm, basically being like, "Hey, what's next?" And, we're like, it's just chaos. Of course, we still loved Splunk because they were sort of in our bones, watching you and helping be involved in it. But the cost to the shareholders of an awkward CEO transition, and even during that knife in the back, you still put the company first. I applaud and salute you for that, sir. That is the unbelievably most selfless thing you can do. It's almost like your wife leaves you for the garden and you're like, "Hey, I wish you the best." I mean, it's like in that level of like, Jesus Christ, what just happened to me? And I appreciated very much the class with which you handled yourself, even though the magnitude of that knifing was profound. I mean, it was like diabolical.
Yeah, I don't know. I've talked to a bunch of them, and I try to figure out really, really like what happened. And it's still not clear to me, which again it's my fault for not managing a board effectively, right? That should never.
I was like, what is your thesis? Didn't have one.
That should never happen. But I mean, the high road was painful at times, but I love the company and I love the employees and I love our customers and I loved what we did. It really was the most magical 8 years minus 2 days of my entire career. And why would you ever crater that? I remember I had to do an interview on Friday. Told me Thursday night I'd do an interview on Friday, and I don't know how I got through it because my head was exploding. I think I slept like an hour and a half that night. But the employees put together on their own a book that I still have, and all you Splunkers that contributed, I can't thank you enough. But it was hundreds of pages of stories of how Splunk or I or the team had affected their lives and how meaningful it was. And I'll carry that virtual digital book for the rest of my life. And there are some great things that came out of it. And you can control what you control, and you got to let go of everything else. And
you're such a gentleman, man. I don't know why you hang out with riffraff like me, but thank you. I appreciate it. All right, here's one last one. Okay, you got to plug Aviatrix. Like that, you go into network software. Here's this legend from Splunk, $3 billion company, $36 billion market value. All of a sudden, you're down in the dumps. Your face, you're just beaten and bruised. And you take over this company, had a great board, interesting founding kind of story, and doing something different. Network software, though, was the last thing I would have expected you to go to, and yet you did it. And now, a couple of years later, this thing looks like it's kind of on fire, and your vision, which was very contrarian to do network at all, seems to be correct. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so the criteria was board first. Like going back, like when I did PeopleSoft job, I better learn engineering. So if I go back and do a job, I'd better trust the board. And I love our board. It's a really, really talented group of people, and it's a very tight collaborative process, which is great. The networking piece was a little bit scary for me. I only had that 18-month stint at Cisco, and it's not, the layers are so different, and I'm not a deep networking expert. But one of the things that Nick Storiali said, who's John Connor's partner at Ignition, and he is as good as John on the board. Hard to be as good, but they're within 1% of each other, was, hey, I think there's something cyber related here. Like it's networking, but I think that there's a bigger story. And it took a year of really going deep with customers, really going deep with the products, rearranging a lot of the different players on the bus to get the insight of where was the cyber problem that we could actually attack and how could we make this an important and significant company. But we got that insight last year, almost exactly the day, up here in Idaho. I brought the team up here and we had a big offsite on this cloud networking thing. There's no category. This is not going to work. We've got to pivot and let's spend as much time as we have to nail down the pivot. And we're now in it, but I think it's incredibly exciting. I am more passionate about the problem that we're trying to solve here than I was about the problem that Splunk was solving. Because I think it's more consequential for the world.
What is it?
We are evangelizing a cloud native security fabric. And there, if you think about what are the fundamental elements of security, like where can you really take action and stop the bad guys? There's only three. There's identity, which a bunch of people focus on. There's endpoint. So you got like Zscaler with identity and access. There's endpoint, which CrowdStrike and a bunch of other awesome companies do a fantastic job with. And then there's network. And inside the cloud, the architecture, it's been insidious how it's crept up on people. And I learned a lot of lessons as we re-architected Splunk to be a cloud native solution and try to get closer to how does this all work. But the entire cyber industry was more or less grew up to protect data centers from the internet. If you go back to almost every cyber tool, it was what's inside is safe, what's coming in is not, and let's guard those doors. And the whole castle and moat and layer defense strategy evolved. It drove a bunch of products. What we have now in the cloud is three crazy things that if you really stop and think about it, your hair will stand up on end and how at risk we are as a society. The internet is the enterprise network. Almost every service you give a shit about. Snowflake, S3 buckets, ChatGPT, you get to through an internet connection. So the internet is your enterprise network. The perimeter has atomized.
By the way, let's talk about the trillion-dollar companies like Apple. How do you stream Netflix? Like everybody's at network.
And for a consumer, like that's probably okay. For an enterprise that has enterprise data, super proprietary that the bad guys want going across the internet on a regular basis, it's super dangerous. And it's much more convoluted than that because there's so many hops. So just the internet is the enterprise network. The perimeter has atomized. Instead of 8 or 10 or 12 data centers you're protecting, you got tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and so with GenAI, millions of workloads that are sitting in the cloud that had internet connections, either directly or indirectly, that you've got to defend. And most of those workloads are ephemeral. They're either Kubernetes-based or they're next-gen GenAI-based. Something like a static IP address to govern what goes in and out, literally not possible. So the architecture couldn't be more upended. And while everyone's appropriately focusing on endpoint, identity, and access outside the cloud, what do the bad guys want? It's all inside the cloud, and there is no cloud-native security fabric between all those workloads for an enterprise to ensure that they are secure and not being exfiltrated. So simple stuff is not being done right now. And I just saw Qantas got breached last night with a huge data X bill. It pains me. There are probably 50 reported breaches per day. There's probably 1,000 unreported breaches per day, and it is going to keep going up and to the right because the cloud is wide open. People are trying to take...
You would see security spend go up 10x if breaches of public companies were forcibly... Like if there was some compliance, if there's some law, there's like, you get breached, you tell people. I get emails
you have to report it.
that some big company had a breach. Now my data's in the dark web. It's infuriating, even at the consumer level.
We're going to have to do it. We're going to have to do it because right now it's like mental health or other elements where you don't talk about it. You have no idea how much of it is around. And because we're not talking about it, everyone wants to keep it secret and it's not going to happen to them. It's like it is happening every day. That was my message at Splunk is,
we got the Terminator. This is World War X right now. It's going to get 10 times worse like tomorrow.
10 times worse. I mean, Gen AI, it's 24/7 what they can do now, but the agentic frameworks spawn more workloads to fulfill their mission. And unless those workloads have the right security wrappers and all of them are internet connected, and the MCP framework, which is awesome, that's driving agentic AI, has zero security constructs at this point in time. It doesn't even have a registry that's certified. Like this problem, both with the attackers being able to operate 24/7 with the agentic AI and Gen AI, and what Gen AI does to the landscape, like it is going to get really bad. And this is not an Aviatrix. Like I tell everyone, my number one mission, make people aware of the problem and get people to solve it. Number two is plug Aviatrix. But I don't give a crap if you use Aviatrix or not. You better understand how your cloud is architected and you better start taking preventative measures because it's my data that's sitting in that retailer's cloud or that hotel chain's cloud or that bank's cloud. And I do not want society to devolve because we lose faith in online capability. And with that online capability, our world falls apart in days. We run out of food in days. It's bad.
It's almost like you got to just blot out the fear because, like I said, the word cavalier comes to mind when you think about how, and CISOs still don't have enough money. They change jobs every 5 minutes. It's like, it's a tough landscape and CEOs aren't taking them seriously. Like at what event?
They don't even have D&O insurance. Most of them don't even have D&O insurance. They don't even report to the CEO. It's like, what are you guys doing? This man or woman is so valuable and you're not even paying attention to them. Yeah.
No, they should be like all reporting to the CEO and reporting to the board. Doug, this has been amazing. What parting advice do you have for young leaders just to be, resilient and classy and solid, just human beings throughout the wildness of the tech industry, which can throw you for a loop any minute, like board drama, companies in transition, people change. What would you pass on to people?
So what I love about the startup world, and when I'm done with Aviatrix, I'll probably go back and join you and with this work on startups full time because I love the energy there, is the selection criteria gets resilient, non-entitled, gutsy people. So I think within that world, you've got the right starting point. I think the challenge that most founders have is how do you not get distracted? How do you interpret signal from noise? And at Aviatrix, I've kept working on my leadership principles. There's only 5 that I have for the company. I keep refining them down. And part of them are to help guide this thinking process. That first one is relentless curiosity. Like, you're not curious, you're dead. Like, don't even go to work anywhere, but certainly don't be a founder. The second is lead with empathy. That if you're actually curious, you got to listen. You're curious so you can learn. And if you're not actively listening, you're not going to get the benefit of being curious. The third is purpose before action, which is if you are actually curious and you're listening, stop. Use LLMs for 2 days. Figure out what you actually want to do with all that information you've gotten. The fourth is hold everyone accountable, hold yourself and others accountable. And because with that, now you can actually drive accomplishment. And then the fifth is for me, because I suck at this, which is celebrate your successes. Like every day, try and take stock.
Just for a minute.
Yeah, just for 1 second. Just give yourself a little bit of credit. But that, I think all the challenge is how do you keep yourself energized and your people energized? And I just believe so much you've got to filter out the noise. That is all I've been trying to do with Aviatrix. And there's another way we have to do is simplify even further. Now that we've got this mission, like everything extraneous, off the bus. Every initiative, everyone that's not right, focus is gold. We went through this phase where everyone wanted to be thousands of employees. I think Gen AI is going to help us. Like keep it small, keep it tight, keep close to the customer, keep close to the code. Vanity metrics are silly. Just build a great goddamn product, serve your customers, and give your employees something that they'll remember the rest of their lives. And that's it. Like everything else would take care of itself. You'll make a ton of money. You'll maybe be an icon in your industry, but just do the simple stuff.
And don't lose yourself. Like your passion for changing the world and really moving hard things up the hill, a lot of heavy rocks up the hill has kind of defined your career. And I've just always admired the fact that you did it with such passion, with this like conviction that A, you were gonna help customers, and B, that there was always some broader benefit to society for what you were working on. I salute you, man. I've always admired you as a human, as you know. You're a great family. I love spending time with you. And I think the industry is really just lucky to have you, man. Thank you so much for spending all this time with us today.
Well, thank you. The feelings are mutual, Andy. Like I love what you're doing and can't wait to spend more time together.